Critical question number 5. How does the child's speech and language development compare to his or her siblings at the same age or to peers in the child's own speech community? Now here is, if you forget everything I ever say, this is the question you want to go in with. To any evaluation, whatever you're doing, how do his play skills compare to his siblings? How does his vocabulary compare to his peers? How does his problem solving compare to his peers? How does his speech and language compare to his peers? Why? The research tells us that we want to look at kids who are compare this child to children with the same prior experiences, and we're most likely to find that in the child's siblings or the child's peers in the same speech community. Now, siblings can be different. For example, one sibling can come over and actually be born in, let me pick another country, like Korea. The child comes over, they're 3 and 4, 5 when they come over, and they may struggle academically as they acquire English and learn Korean. This child that you're dealing with may have had the older siblings bringing back English from when he was born with the parents and grandparents using Korean. So he's a simultaneous bilingual, which is quite different than our sequential bilingual. And is this child not acquiring the language that one would expect? So that might not be a good comparison, but there may be cousins or peers in a play group or mommy baby group, mommy child group, mommy and me, that's what they're called, that might actually give us important information. So what about this child? Well, the mom reported that the little boy plays with other Spanish-speaking children his age, and he appears to be understanding what they're saying without difficulties. She was worried a little bit about his speech, but comprehension was fine. And once you know that, you know this child, so much about this child. When a child has good comprehension, they don't have an intellectual disability. When a child has good comprehension, they're able to learn very quickly. One of my favorite cases was this boy who came with his foster father. And this foster father was amazing. He had taken a lot of children into his family, and he had adopted one child early on who actually came to the evaluation. I think he was 8. Yeah, the child he adopted. Then he had some natural children of his own, or non-adopted children. And then he had this little boy with him. And this little boy was 3.5 years old. And he was referred for the speech and language, for this set of evaluations, because we weren't sure why. I'll tell you why in a second, because we did find that out. And we asked the foster father, what did he think about Henry's development over time? And the father said, I really don't know. I've only had him for a few weeks. 6 weeks. I said, okay, so we're not going to get this long language background and acquisitional history. But he said, I do know that the foster family that had him before spoke only Spanish, and that they were the ones who referred him because they were worried about his language. But he was a monolingual English speaker who was put into a monolingual Spanish-speaking foster home. And so they might have been worried about his language because he wouldn't be communicating that much. And then 6 weeks ago, he got put in with this father. And then the father said, he made so much progress over the 6 weeks. But the foster father said, Henry's language is now age appropriate compared to other 3.5-year-olds and to his own 8-year-old son when he was Henry's age. So this is a father that has a lot of experience with 3.5-year-olds. The father also noted when Henry came to his house, he spoke less than he does now. In the 6 weeks, he's been talking a great deal. And when you see that kind of improvement, you know this child is typically developing. He was typically developing. You're going to see a few more examples of this little boy, Henry, not his real name. Critical question number 6. Was the child's performance during the evaluation representative of how he usually acts? So we're in this situation, and we're often with a small table or in a weird situation. Maybe the child's comfortable or not comfortable. Even if you're in their own home, they're likely not comfortable having someone who acts like you and looks like an evaluator coming in and doing these kind of things that nobody else does, these kind of testing that nobody else does. And so you want to know, did the child perform the way he normally performs? Is it representative of how he normally speaks? Is it representative of how he normally plays? He was so quiet with me. I have to tell you a story. There was this bilingual psychologist who was seeing this little girl who was 2 months, for an evaluation. Psychologist was a sequential bilingual like me, so he He wasn't from a Latino culture. His Spanish skills passed the BEA, but were not so hot. And the little girl was 4 years, 2 months. I think that was her age. And he gave her the whipsy, but she didn't really respond. Why? Because if he had delved a little deeper, he would have realized that a little girl might not respond to a man who didn't speak Spanish very well, who didn't look like any man that she had ever met, and who was doing things that she'd never done before. Instead of thinking that through, and finding more information about this child beyond what was going on, he actually identified her as having an IQ of 64, right? 64 is a moderately severe to severe cognitive impairment. Cognitively impaired child. Turns out, if he had asked the mom, who was a very reliable informant, he would have learned that she was just sitting there because she was scared, and that's what she thought was appropriate behavior. You're obedient when someone, a man who doesn't look like anybody you know, or a man in general, is sitting in front of you and asking you to do things. It's not appropriate when he asks you a question to tell a story or to show off. The psychologist was found negligent under his license. So you don't want to do that for many reasons. Forget about the negligence under your license. Look what he did to that child. And if people hadn't intervened, advocates had not intervened because they had a connection to the mom, a connection that was very, not a group that's a legal group for children with disabilities, but a connection to the mom, that child would have been placed in a 4410 preschool. That child would have been identified with an IEP as a disabled child with an IQ that was greater than 2 standard deviations below the mean, closer to 3 standard deviations below the mean. Very close to 3 standard deviations below the mean. Cognitively impaired at the greater than lower, her cognitive development was less than 98% of the population. That's what that evaluator said. In fact, the evaluator didn't know how to evaluate her. And what happened is, thank whomever made the connections, that evaluator was found, you have to do something more than this. And the child was found not to be cognitively very bright. A child may not want to perform for a stranger seated at a tiny table in a room with boring spiral-bound manuals full of pictures of watches and rubber ducks.